Imagine you're just taking a stroll, walking past a totally ordinary-looking apartment building on the outskirts of Belgrade, Serbia. From the outside, completely unremarkable. You literally wouldn't give it a second glance. But if you were to step into the garage and slip through this tiny hidden hatch, you'd be led down into a basement. And suddenly, you're standing in an eerie, stark white room. Well, mostly white, except for some small dark stains on the walls. The floor is covered in dark tiles, and sitting right at the back of this room is a massive industrial meat grinder. Now, this is not the set of some Hollywood horror movie. This was a very real, fully functioning human slaughterhouse, used by one of Europe's absolutely most ruthless crime syndicates. Today, we're going to unpack exactly how this hidden room came to be, the mind-blowing global tech takedown that finally exposed it, and the deeply concerning political ties that allegedly allowed it to operate in the first place.
And I think this specific quote brilliantly illustrates the sheer, calculating horror behind their entire operation. I mean, this was their literal motto. The gang would kidnap their enemies, bring them down to this hidden torture chamber, and meticulously ensure absolutely no evidence was left behind. They genuinely believed that by literally grinding their victims into nothing and then dumping those remains straight into the Danube River, they were completely untouchable. They were turning human beings into liquid to feed the fish, totally erasing their existence to dodge prosecution. So you have to wonder, how on earth did a group of criminals reach this level of sophisticated, horrific violence?
To understand that, let's get into Section 1, the human slaughterhouse, and inside the modus operandi. At the absolute center of this bloodbath is a man named Veljko Belivuk. Now, Belivuk wasn't always a mafia boss. He actually started out as a prominent, highly aggressive soccer hooligan in the Belgrade stadiums, leading a group known as Principi. But over time, he totally transformed his street gang into a heavily armed outpost for organized crime. And what's truly terrifying here is the highly psychological tactics they used to get victims into that basement. It wasn't just grabbing people off the street, they perfected a chilling, step-by-step process. Step 1, they would find someone incredibly close to their target and essentially force them to switch sides. Step 2, they used that trusted friend to lure the target to a fake, seemingly safe meeting. And Step 3, they'd ambush the victim and drag them straight to the slaughterhouse in Ridopek. Take a victim we'll call Luka, for example. Luka was a rival hooligan who genuinely feared for his life. In August 2020, while his wife was literally making dinner for their babies, Luka went out to meet a trusted friend on a dirt road to buy some guns for protection. He had absolutely no idea his friend had betrayed him. Belivuk's gang ambushed him, dragged him to the house, and actually forced him to unlock his phone to send terrifying messages to his own boss before they brutally ended his life. This brings us to a really interesting concept that investigative journalists use to describe Belivuk's gang, the millennial mafia. See, this is a new generation that doesn't just kill for business. They turn brutal violence into a horrifying spectacle. To see the contrast, just look at another victim, Milan Lipoya. Lipoya was an old-school criminal. He was famous for being part of the Pink Panthers, the notorious jewel thieves who pulled off those legendary heists in Dubai. Well, when Lipoya was lured into the slaughterhouse, he was genuinely shocked by the axes in the chamber. He reportedly said, "I'm not for this kind of stuff. We can do fist fighting, we can shoot with guns, but this thing? No." He walked in expecting an old-school mafia hit, but he was facing a new, unimaginably brutal generation.
Let's zoom out from the house for a moment and look at Section 2, the Balkan Mafia War and a deadly split. To figure out why there were so many targets being lured to this house in the first place, we have to look at the macro conflict that sparked this extreme level of violence. Let's walk through the timeline here. Everything traces back to a coastal town in Montenegro called Kotor. For over a decade, a single, massive criminal group called the Kotor clan controlled a huge share of the cocaine trade flowing from South America right into Europe. But in 2014, their main drug lord, Darko Šarić, gets arrested. Shortly after that, a massive cocaine deal goes completely sideways in Spain. This event entirely fractured the underworld, splitting the giant Kotor syndicate into two warring factions. By 2016, Belivuk was taking full control of his hooligan group in Serbia, positioning them to capitalize on the chaos. And by 2020, the violence escalated so dramatically that the slaughterhouse was opened just to handle the sheer number of bodies.
So the absolutely crucial point here is the deep, bitter divide between these two factions. On one side, you have the Kovac clan, who Belivuk and his Principi hooligans allied with as a major outpost in Serbia. On the other side, you have the Scolari clan, their bitter rivals. And listen, this wasn't just some local turf war. This schism sparked a massive, bloody drug war that saw these two factions hunting each other down across international borders. We're talking Croatia, Bosnia, Slovenia, and Serbia. Authorities estimate that well over 100 murders are directly connected to this specific feud. And those victims in the slaughterhouse, they were almost entirely Scolari affiliates. Which brings us to Section 3,
cracking Sky ECC and the tech takedown. If Belivuk's gang was so incredibly meticulous about destroying physical evidence, how did they ever get caught? Well, their downfall was actually their blind overconfidence in a single piece of software. Let's look at the tech they were relying on. Sky ECC was an ultra-secure encrypted messenger network. You couldn't just go and download this on a standard app store. It came pre-installed on special phones bought exclusively through underground resellers. The cameras, the microphones, the GPS, all physically disabled. To even open the chat interface, you had to enter a secret code into what looked exactly like a normal calculator app. It had panic passwords that wiped the phone instantly and a function that automatically deleted messages after a set time. Belivuk's gang felt completely, 100% invisible using this app to coordinate their crimes. They felt secure because the company behind Sky ECC was insanely confident in their own encryption. Get this, they actually offered a staggering $5 million bounty to absolutely anyone who could hack their network within 90 days. It was exactly this illusion of unbreakable security that led these criminals to let their guard down entirely. But, European authorities were quietly watching the whole time. Let's break down how this builds into one of the greatest digital stings in history. Police discovered that Sky's global communications basically all ran through servers sitting in a data center in northern France. So French, Belgian, and Dutch authorities teamed up to pull off an absolute technical masterpiece. Step 1. They installed an IP tap directly on the French servers to monitor the traffic. Step 2. Because all that traffic was encrypted, they ingeniously found a way to copy the server's active memory. Step 3. From that memory, they obtained the Holy Grail, the encryption certificate itself. And finally, Step 4. Using that certificate, they were able to decrypt the criminals' messages in real time. And the scale of what they uncovered is it's hard to even wrap your head around. Law enforcement suddenly found themselves intercepting approximately 1 billion messages from 170,000 registered phones all over the world. It was literally like flipping on the lights in a pitch-black room full of global crime syndicates. They saw massive clustering around the port of Antwerp, which is a major cocaine gateway, and of course, a massive glowing cluster right in the Balkans. And buried deep in those Balkan communications were the daily chats of Veljko Belivuk and his gang. Because they thought the app was completely impenetrable, they spoke openly and horrifyingly about their crimes. Take a look at this intercepted message from Belivuk, who was operating under the nickname Soprano. He literally wrote, "I can't wait to strangle him. Don't skip those juicy details for me." He was actively asking his man to describe the torture sessions in length while he was out of town. They felt untouchable. But here is the fatal mistake that truly brought the entire Slaughterhouse down. Remember how Sky ECC had that auto-delete function to protect its users? Well, Belivuk's gang wanted to keep photos of their victims as, gruesome souvenirs and proof of their kills. So at the end of every single month, right before the system wiped itself clean, gang members would manually save these horrific photos and send them to one designated gang member for safekeeping. They essentially bypassed their own multi-million-dollar security system. They perfectly preserved high-definition photos of their crime scenes, the weapons, and the torture room, and essentially handed it right over to the police. The French police immediately shared this absolute goldmine of evidence with Serbian authorities, leading straight to the massive arrest of Belivuk and his top lieutenants. But of course, our explainer does not end with just those arrests. We need to zoom out one final time to Section 4, the political connection and a chain of command. Because taking down the foot soldiers is one thing, but what about the actual system that allowed them to operate so freely? According to investigative journalists, the rabbit hole goes incredibly deep here. Back in 2017, which is years before the Slaughterhouse even opened, Belivuk was actually arrested in connection with a murder in Belgrade. The police seized his phone, and inside they found some very revealing WhatsApp messages. These messages later leaked to journalists, and they allegedly exposed deep, systemic ties between Belivuk's hooligan group and the highest levels of the Serbian government. These leaked texts allegedly map out a direct, highly concerning chain of command. At level 1, Belivuk was reportedly in daily contact with a high-ranking member of the Serbian gendarmerie, a specially trained paramilitary police unit who advised Belivuk on exactly what moves to make. But the messages indicated that this level 1 contact was reporting up to a level 2, a woman named Diana, identified by journalists as the General Secretary of the Serbian police. Basically, the number 2 cop in the whole country. And when really big decisions needed to be made, the text referenced a level 3, the boss, who was likely the Minister of Police, and even a level 4, the big boss, which journalists strongly suspect referred to the president himself.
Now, you might be wondering, why on earth would the state protect a brutal mafia gang? Well, according to explosive court testimony from Believik himself after his 2021 arrest, his gang wasn't just a cartel, they were a political tool. Believik testified under oath that his group was organized by order of the state. He claimed they were used as a literal street force to intimidate anti-government protesters at football games and to physically crush dissent during rallies. He essentially stated that he was doing massive favors for the government by providing violent crowd control.
Now, we absolutely have to look at both sides of this incredibly serious situation. On one hand, you have these severe accusations, independent investigative journalists and the gang members themselves testifying that the state actively protected, instructed, and utilized the mafia to maintain their political power. But on the other hand, you have an absolute total denial. Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić firmly and strictly denies all of these allegations. He maintains that he has never even met Veljković Belivuc in his life, and his administration is quick to point out that, hey, they're the ones who ultimately carried out the arrests. They use that as proof that they are fighting organized crime, definitely not aiding it. However, impartial critics and journalists in the region, well, they theorize a slightly different motive. They argued that the state didn't act out of some sudden desire for justice, but purely out of necessity. The theory goes that once the French police cracked Sky ECC and possessed all those gruesome photos and messages, the whole situation became a massive, uncontrollable international liability. Critics theorize the government only finally severed ties and arrested Belivuc because that massive French data leak essentially forced their hand on the world stage. They couldn't hide it anymore.
Which leaves us with this final, really crucial question to ponder. Yes, the House of Horrors in Ritopek is permanently closed. And yes, Veljko Belivuc and his immediate gang are sitting behind bars right now. But if the alleged political infrastructure, that whole chain of command that supposedly enabled them for years, remains completely untouched and uninvestigated, has the problem actually been solved? With the foot soldiers arrested, but the systemic allegations of state-level corruption entirely unaddressed, can deeply rooted mafia ties ever truly be severed? Or are they all just waiting for the next group of ambitious hooligans to step up to the plate?